Alright, so today we're going to be talking about moss plants, and I really have wanted to make this video for a while because moss plants are by far the easiest plants to grow. They're so cool. You can do so many different things with them. You can create underwater trees. You can do some really dense foreground aquascapes. They're just so versatile. So as with every plant guide, we'll be talking about this plant's compatibility, its color, its the way to propagate it, and there's one more in there. There's one more there. Oh, its growth habits as well. Did I already say that? I don't think I did. Okay, and its growth habits as well. So first, let's talk about compatibility. Now, moss plants are kind of on the more fragile side, so you really don't want to mix this plant with big fish or nippy fish by any means. So I would recommend that you house moss plants with small fish like tetras. Rainbow fish I think would be good as well. I've seen rainbows with moss plants and they do pretty good. So small fish along those lines, but definitely don't house them with goldfish. I've heard horror stories, goldfish literally turning a whole portion of Java moss into a little miniature salad. So don't do that. Don't mix moss plants with big fish like that. So as far as compatibility, they go really great with small non-nippy fish. Now, growth habits is actually something pretty difficult to talk about because so many different moss plants grow in so many different ways. For the most part on my website, I sell willow moss, Java moss, flame moss, weeping moss, Taiwan moss, and Christmas moss, and that's all I sell. And for the most part, willow moss will basically grow sporadically. It actually tends to branch out a lot. So if you're looking for a moss plant that's really just going to take over and grow really dense, willow moss would be great. Java moss grows the same sporadically, but it tends to kind of stay more compact. So if you tie it to, say, driftwood, it'll pretty much end up covering, the entire portion of driftwood that you tie it to. Christmas moss is more on the big side, kind of similar to willow moss. It branches out as well. Flame moss is pretty cool because it grows like, flames. It stays true to the name. It grows vertically, So flame moss is really great for underwater tree aquascapes. It's a great plant to create an underwater tree. You tie it to driftwood and stick it in your substrate in a way where it looks like an underwater tree. Taiwan moss is a new moss that I have on my website that I'm not really that familiar with, but for the most part, what I've seen, how it grows in my tank is basically the same as Java moss. It just kind of stays compact and grows close to whatever it's tied to. So basically, different moss plants grow in different ways. So I would say just pay attention to the name because the name pretty much dictates its growth habits pretty well. Now, as far as color, most moss plants are basically green or dark green in color. I rarely haven't seen any moss plants that are either red or some other weird color. Moss plants typically tend to be light green or dark green in color. So I would say that they're really good for jungle aquascapes or aquascapes where you just have a bunch of plants. You want a really dense aquascape because it just creates that natural feel. If you've ever been to a forest or a national park or whatever, you'll see moss plants growing on trees and stuff, in the wild. And you can really create that effect in an aquarium. So you can really create a dense jungle-looking aquascape because moss plants are pretty typical to moss that grows in the wild. It sticks to everything. Well, it doesn't really stick, but you can tie it to there and it'll eventually wrap itself around whatever you grow it on. So moss plants typically are light to dark green in color, and they really help create a natural-looking aquascape. Now, propagation is pretty simple, but it probably will require you to purchase some supplies. I would say the best way to propagate moss is to tie them to stainless steel mesh. If you don't know what that is, just Google it and you'll find a bunch of information about it. But there are some companies that do sell pre-cut little 2x2 square pieces of stainless steel mesh. And you got to make sure you buy the stainless steel mesh because other types of metal mesh will simply rust in your water, So I would say that's the best way to propagate them is just to take small portions off your original portion of moss and tie them to those little stainless steel squares and just allow them to grow out and cover those squares. That's mostly how I receive my Taiwan moss. All the other moss plants I get come in portions and little balls, but I would say the best way to propagate them is to tie them to stainless steel mesh because it pretty much guarantees that you're propagating that entire portion of moss. You really can't rely on just throwing a portion of moss in your tank and expecting it to grow. Because it'll just disintegrate. It's not a plant that really stays together because there's so many different strands of moss intertwined with each other, but they don't stay together. So the best way is to tie it to something. So if you can't tie it to stainless steel mesh, at least tie it to driftwood or some other stuff like rock or whatever. So the best way to propagate it is to tie it to something. But for the most part, it's pretty easy. You just take a portion off, tie it to something else, and that portion will grow out, and you have a whole nother section of moss. And lastly, I just thought I would give you guys a few tips on what you need to grow moss. Now, as I said in the beginning of the video, moss plants are typically pretty easy to grow and don't require a lot of the more fancier side of planted tank supplies like other demanding plants need. Typically, moss plants will grow perfectly fine in aquariums that have medium or low to medium light and a tank that has plenty of nutrients. So if you have a medium to low light tank, and you don't dose nutrients, if you want to grow moss, just start dosing maybe iron or potassium, once a week, and that should help move it along. And also, moss plants are one of those plants that you can grow that don't rely on substrate to grow, because they really don't have a root structure. So you can typically just tie moss plants to anything in your aquarium, and it'll grow on that driftwood or rock, whatever you tie it to. So you don't have to really worry about planted tank substrate at all either. So a great plant for a low-tech tank that simply just has low to medium light and maybe a few nutrients. So that's basically all you need. So I would say moss is a great beginner plant, or for somebody that's on a tight budget. So that's it for this plant guide. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget about the new weekly raffle on my live show every Saturday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I hope you guys will check it out. It's a lot of fun, and I'm so excited that I'm doing this raffle now and I'm able to give back to you guys, because I can't wait to see people get excited and light up when they win a free plant from me. I just love giving back to you guys. It really warms my heart. So thanks again for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. Have fun with your tanks, and I will see you on Saturday on the live show.